Well, hello there. I'm back. It's time for DCU Daily number 3. That's right. Today we're talking about Blue Beetle again. And well, yesterday we were talking about it in a positive sense that it's going to be a hit. Today I'm here to tell you guys that it's going to flop. And the reason, well, there's three of them. I chose three reasons why Blue Beetle is going to flop. And well, some of you guys might have already guessed what those reasons are. But here we go. Reason number one, the recent DC record at the movies has not been very good. Right now, we got The Flash playing in theaters. It's barely made $100 million domestically. Globally, it may not even make as much as Black Adam did, and Black Adam did not hit 400 million. It's done better than Shazam 2 did, but then again, Shazam 2 is probably the worst flop in the history of superhero movies ever, especially considering its budget. So yeah, the record of those recent DC movies, whether it's Shazam 2, The Flash, Black Adam, even like Birds of Prey, and even the first Shazam movie, like they didn't make a ton of money. It's been a long time since the first Aquaman movie that a DC movie has crossed the $500 million mark. Meanwhile, even the worst Marvel movies like Quantumania can hit that mark. Not in their sleep, but like they get there. And a lot of like average at best Marvel movies, even like in a snap, like they'll get to that level, or certainly go past $500 million, and that's because there's that brand image that the MCU has had. Now, granted, in recent times it's been tarnished a little bit, but I would still say that the MCU still has certain seal of approval with the audiences that know that there's a certain level of quality they can expect from projects in that universe. Whereas with DC, it seems like all over the place, and that's led to audiences being disinterested in the franchise, and that's so unfortunate. And I think that will unfortunately affect Blue Beetle. While I would love to, in an ideal world, tell you that Blue Beetle is going to go out there, have a good old time, and make $1 billion because it's going to become like that runaway hit, like a Super Mario Brothers movie or Top Gun Maverick, but I it's hard. I mean, they're not the Warner Brothers and DC Studios are doing what they can to promote this movie, but they're in a really awkward position. It's a movie that was originally gonna be on HBO Max, or Max as you might call it now. But they said it's better than that, and we need to make some money off of this. I think a fantastic decision on the part of David Zaslav and Warner Brothers Discovery. They put more money behind it, so that has certainly helped probably the visual effects part, some of the bigger actions set pieces of the film, and definitely a lot of that extra money going to the movie is going to be for the marketing, because you're going to do a lot more marketing for a movie that's going to be theatrical versus just going straight to streaming. But at the same time, the last three DC movies have not really connected with the audiences, and I just don't think that this movie. I mean, look, a movie like give me let me give you another example. Bumblebee suffered because the previous few Transformers movies didn't really connect with the crowd. Now, look, Transformers, that was the first Age of Extinction, the first Mark Wahlberg one, made $1 billion, the highest grossing I think of all the Transformers movies. But the last night was bad. It was very, very bad. And that led to the Bumblebee movie not doing as well. I think the Bumblebee's box office was affected because of the previous movie being so terrible, and audiences just didn't know what to expect. And the new Transformers movie, fairly average. It's struggling like to kind of make the kind of money that those Michael Bay movies at the peak of their prime did. And I think that similar effect will happen here because of those previous DC movies, and even going as far back as 2019, even before the pandemic. Like I said, Aquaman was the last movie in the DCEU to make over $500 million, not $1 billion. I mean, it made $1 billion. It's the only movie in the DCEU to make $1 billion, but it's been a long time since any DCU movie has made more than $500 million. Like that's half of a billion. For those of you who need help with your math. But yeah, I think it will struggle because of the other recent DC flops, and that's hurt the DC image. The studio that made the first $1 billion superhero movie of all time in The Dark Knight, the first two, I should say, The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises, or the two out of the first three, because I think the Avengers came out the same year and a few months before The Dark Knight Rises. But yeah, two of the first three superhero movies that made $1 billion were DC movies. People forget that. And if you account for inflation, I bet you some of those Batman movies from the 80s and 90s were still really huge hits. because they were. And in the first Superman movie too, DC is the brand that should be leading the pack, but they've fallen behind because of extreme mismanagement by the Warner Brothers studio. And with Warner Brothers Discovery coming in, David Zaslav saying, "Hey, look, we got to get this shit back on track." Hiring James Gunn and Peter Safran. Now you can argue, or for or against the idea that, well, that was a good thing or not. Maybe they should have kept Zack Snyder, brought Zack Snyder back, or maybe they should have went for somebody like a Christopher Nolan or somebody else entirely. All that set aside, I think they've done a good job of pivoting towards something new and something different, and that's why we'll get Superman Legacy in the not too distant future. 2025 seems like it's a long time away. 2 years, almost 2 years to the day when that comes out. It's a long time to wait, but that hopefully will be the gap that we need to rehabilitate the DC image. But as far as Blue Beetle is concerned, I think it's going to struggle because of those recent flops. I mean, the Flash is not going to be too far in the rearview mirror by the time Blue Beetle comes out. So yeah, I think it's going to struggle a bit. I really hope that it doesn't, but that's one of the reasons why I think it's going to struggle to make money and probably will flop like those previous DC movies, the recent three have. Now, reason number two why Blue Beetle is probably going to flop, and again, I'm not here to be the Debbie Downer. I actually, yesterday's episode, we talked about why it's going to be a hit, and I really hope that version of reality is the one we get to live. But let's talk about why it's going to flop. So reason number two why I think Blue Beetle is going to flop is it's not a very well-known character. There's fans of the animated, projects like the movies and the DCAU and the shows where he's been a part of. I think he was in The Brave and the Bold, the Justice League shows. He's known for being paired up with, especially the Jaime Reyes version of the character, being not the Ted Kord, but the newer Jaime Reyes version of the character being paired up with Booster Gold. And I sincerely hope that we get to see that pairing in live action. But ultimately, the character is not very well known. He's sort of a B, maybe even a C level character. So I do think that that's going to affect the box office as well. And I hope that it doesn't. Ultimately, I will say that that affected a lot of other movies recently for DC, like Shazam. The first movie and the second movie combined did not make like $500 million. So yeah, I would say that Blue Beetle is probably even lesser known than Shazam was. So it will probably struggle because of that too, especially with the mainstream audiences, the general public, who will probably need to see a lot of good positive word of mouth for this movie to be something that they choose to go and watch in a theater. And given that recently a lot of studios are throwing their movies on streaming much sooner than they used to, some people might still wait even if the movie is good, and even if people are talking about it in a positive sense, they might still say, you know what, those last three DC movies weren't that good. He's not a very well-known character. What, he's like an Iron Man crossed over with a Spider-Man? Isn't that what we got in Avengers anyway? Like, I'll wait. Like, people, there will be people out there who will say that, and that's unfortunate. But I really hope that doesn't happen. But the fact that he's not a very well-known character, I think, is going to hurt Blue Beetle's potential at the box office. Now, reason number three is the fact that James Gunn, he's hinted that this movie won't be in continuity with the DCU. Now, where does that come from? He went on this Michael Rosenbaum podcast, from Smallville. He played Lex Luthor on that show on the CW. And James Gunn said, look, Jaime Reyes, Blue Beetle, he's the first DCU character, but Superman Legacy is the first DCU movie. What does that mean? Well, we can only infer based on that fairly vague statement, much, very Kevin Feige-esque of him, by the way. We can infer from that, hey, look, Blue Beetle, maybe even, the Zola Mariduena version of Blue Beetle that we're going to see in this movie will, transition over to the new DCU, much like, the Amanda Waller character or Peacemaker, some of those other James Gunn-led characters who are coming over. Maybe even Jason Momoa's Aquaman and Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman. But overall, that statement tells me that the events of this movie don't count. They're not in canon. They're not in continuity with the new DCU, the continuity that Superman Legacy is going to begin. And that, I do think, is a statement, again, where DC is in this weird transitional phase. And I think one of the mistakes that they're making is they're being vague in a way that is bad for marketing. for their movies. Like, the fact that they've made so many extensive announcements about their new slate with the DCU. Look, fantastic stuff. It looks great. Some of the ideas I'm a little iffy about, but some of the projects I'm really excited to see, like Booster Gold, especially if they're crossing over with Blue Beetle. Um, while all of that sounds great, it does affect these movies. There are 4 movies coming out this year. I almost feel like maybe they should have just said, "Hey, we're not gonna be throwing these movies out, basically into the trash can by announcing all of those DCU projects." Maybe they should have held off on all those details, but they didn't. And here we are. And the fact that we have all of those extensive plans for the new DCU already out there living in the world and in the social media zeitgeist, it leads you to kind of believe that these 4 movies this year, from Shazam, Fury of the Gods, The Flash, Blue Beetle, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, all of these movies are kind of lame duck films that ultimately they're not really going to count. Ultimately, they're just not going to transition over to the new DCU continuity. So one's got to wonder why bother going to see them, and that's a fair thing to wonder, you know. And I think people are going to wonder the same for Blue Beetle, much like they did for Shazam 2 and The Flash, and they'll probably think the same about Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, even though the first Aquaman made $1 billion, and the second one is also going to come out in the December month, where you're going to have a lot of box office money to go around, and movies in the Christmas season tend to do well, especially for quadrant films like the Aquaman movie. And I can only imagine the second one's gonna be kind of the same in terms of its tone as the first one. But I think the fact that we've got this issue where it's this gray area and you don't know if the new DCU is going to carry over any of the story elements, any of the characters, any of the other aspects of even like the suit or what the power set is for Blue Beetle. Like, we just don't know. Like, yeah, he's the first character in the DCU, great. So like, Wonder Woman could be the first character in DCU because we saw her in the Flash as a cameo. Spoiler alert. The Flash will be probably in the new DCU. Of course, he will. There will be a Batman. There will be a Superman, and like, you could say the same about all of those characters. You could have said like Peacemaker is the first character in the DCU because we're gonna get a season 2, and clearly that's gonna be in the DCU because that season will come out after Superman Legacy. James Gunn will go straight from the movie to working on Peacemaker season 2. So yeah, I mean, that statement, on one hand, James Gunn saying that, hey, the Blue Beetle is the first DCU character, but Superman Legacy is the first DCU film. On one hand, it gives you some clarity, but on the other, it's very confusing. I just don't know what that means, really, because it can mean a number of things, and that kind of confusion, that kind of purposefully vague statement, I don't think is what the DC films need right now, especially this year in 2023. They need to get behind these movies because they're these kind of statements and any kind of like further detail of the DCU that wipes the DCEU out of existence. It's really undermining any kind of marketing effort that DC Studios and Warner Brothers are putting into their current slate of films. So yeah, I think that statement, while you can look at it as a positive, because that this version, that there's at least iteration in some form of the Blue Beetle character, maybe even with Zola Mariduena playing the character, will transition into the new DCU continuity. You at the same time can look at it and say, well, but cool, but I can just wait and watch the movie at home in a few weeks after it comes out or a couple of months later. Why go to see it in theaters, especially because it doesn't look like the events of the movie, if you go by what James Gunn said, will be a part of the new DCU continuity. So yeah, I mean, look, ultimately, I'm excited for the movie. George Lopez, Zola Mariduena, you got Angel Manuel Soto, who he's a good director. He's got not a big resume, but a decent one. And the trailer looks fantastic. It's probably the coolest superhero movie trailer of the year, even better than The Flash, or certainly better than the Quantumania. And we haven't seen a lot of the trailers for Aquaman yet. We haven't seen anything for Aquaman yet. And while I like the Marvels trailer, I definitely think the Blue Beetle trailer is like cool. Like, it's a trailer that gets reactions in a movie theater. You're sitting there waiting for another movie. It's happened to me a couple of times, and both times people are like, oh, especially like toward the end of the trailer, where like he's like, I can the AI in the Scarab is telling him, I can make whatever weapon you want, and then he like creates this Mortal Kombat-esque or Final Fantasy-esque sword from his hand. I'm like, yeah, it's part Iron Man, part Spider-Man, part Green Lantern power set, while looking wildly different. And the fact that he's a Latino-led superhero, there's a lot going for this movie. So I really hope it does well. But I just gave you three reasons why it's going to be a flop, and those are three pretty big ones. The fact that, this character, while maybe it will show up in the new DCU, anything that happens, the events of this movie will probably not count. That's a big reason to not watch the movie. The fact that the recent DC movies have all been flops, none of them making over $400 million. Most of them not even. I think none of them actually made even. No, two out of the three didn't even make $300 million, or so far at least. The Flash hasn't gone there. That's not going to help. Like, people are clearly not interested in DC movies right now, or at least the majority of the people aren't. And the fact that Blue Beetle is not a very well-known character, that's always going to be a big problem when you're trying to get a movie out in the summer months and you want to grab a large chunk of the general audience. If they don't know who this character is, they'll struggle to come to the theater and enjoy a movie. I mean, sure, there will be positive word of mouth, or at least I hope there will be, because the one thing that will kill this movie more than anything else is bad reviews and bad word of mouth from audiences who go to see it. So for me, keeping my fingers crossed that this movie does really well, because I am a big fan. It's one of my most anticipated movies for the remainder of the year. In a year when you have Oppenheimer, Barbie, Mission Impossible yet to come, the Marvels, you've even got the Aquaman 2 coming out. There's a lot of good movies on the way, and Blue Beetle, I think, has the potential to be one of the standouts. But I just think that there's a lot of reasons that are working against it, and unfortunately, I think that probably will sink the ship for this film. And while I hope to still make a trilogy of films for Blue Beetle, like the director has said in press interviews, right now I have a hard time being very optimistic about it. And even if I enjoy it, I just don't know if a lot of people out there are going to enjoy it. I mean, hey, tell me what you guys think. Are you going to go watch this movie? Are you going to go see it in opening weekend? Are you going to wait for it to come out, in home theaters on Max, HBO Max, whatever you want to call it? Or are you even interested in the character? Do you even know who Blue Beetle is? Like, tell me in the comments below. Like and subscribe. We're going to be back every day, Monday to Friday, DCU Daily, new show here on the Oh So Curious channel. We have also got Late Night with Rolan Underground. We have got Girls Gone Geek, The Dan Show. I'm Dan, so you can see me on there too. On the weekends, we do the Oh So Curious show, where we review the latest movie that weekend, and we talk about some news like the WGA strike that's going on, or the SAG after negotiations with the AMPTP. We also talk about things like, hey, look, they just cast the new Superman, the new Lois Lane. We'll be talking about that on DCU Daily. So lots more to come. So stay tuned in, and I'll be back next week. This was the Friday show, so it's been fun talking to you guys, and you can see me back here on Monday, but lots more to talk about on DCU Daily. Plenty of new DC content. We're also going to probably break down, what killed the DCEU. I really would love to do a postmortem on that. But yeah, and any news that breaks, breaking news about the Blue Beetle movie, breaking news about the Aquaman movie, anything James Gunn says that's worth talking about, all of that you can find here on DCU Daily. So like, subscribe, leave a comment below, tell me what you would like for me to talk about on this show. But until next time, have a great rest of your day, guys, and I'll see you on the other side on DCU Daily 4. Until then, goodbye.